we're integrating multiple perspectives from across the professional education ecosystems, including principals, teachers, PE providers, subject associations, governing bodies and education systems, as well as different policies, universities and others. I wanted to get to this so you could sort of see what we're sort of talking about in terms of the different systems. You've got your out-of-field teaching teacher in the middle, and then you have the various microsystems that they interact within. So they're the immediate relationships that are affecting the individual out-of-field teacher. Then you've got your mesosystem, which is your relationships and processes between the different microsystems. What's the relationship and impact between an out-of-field teacher's immediate relationships and the external relationships? So sort of within this mesosystem, we're saying that they are mediating access to some extent of what's occurring in the exosystem. And the exosystem is where we are placing the external formal professional learning opportunities. And then your macro system is those cultural values and beliefs relating to quality teaching and learning and specialisation. And then your chronosystem is your changes in policies, particularly at the moment, the pressure from teacher workforce challenges. We're looking at pathways, right? So we're looking at, we created this Y model where we identify 3 different pathways to becoming in field. One is initial teacher education, one's the workplace and what's the learning within schools, and then this professional education that's quite separate to what occurs in schools to some extent. So if we look at the initial teacher education, there are a number of factors. Here we've got various parts of the immediate environment of the teachers, but also the policies that are influencing what's happening at initial teacher education.
Now, this is an obvious place. This is where teachers become in field because they've followed the normal pathway to becoming a science teacher or a maths teacher. And there's different policies there.
And then the green on the outside are those attitudes and values that are informing that, particularly attitudes around specialisation.
Certainly in the Australian context, we've got critique of initial teacher education all the time. But there's certain attitudes and values about education, and there's the status of the profession within society.
Then in schools, the workplace learning is where you'd see a lot of teachers are learning on the job.
So often teachers in Australia will say, I don't need to do professional development because I learn on the job. This is about the learning on the job that happens at schools. It's very much dictated by school leadership practices and what support they provide to teachers, and also the practices of assigning teachers to teach out. And there's certain macros or attitudes then that inform that. It's particularly different in rural regional situations. There is an understanding that we need to deal with the issue of out-of-field, but unfortunately, out-of-field teaching is often seen as a solution to the problem of teacher shortage.
Ample access within rural regional areas to teachers to actually have people to learn from, the cultures of support that are developed within the school, and the varying tolerance of assigning teachers to teach out of field. They're all different attitudes that inform the type of supports that are available within the schools. And then you've got your professional development or professional education, which is in particularly looking at the relationship between government funding, partnerships occurring across the ecosystem, universities, associations and governments, for example, and then the important role that subject associations play, particularly in providing those solutions. And so when you have a look at the exosystem here, you've got your partnerships between university associations, governments and other organisations. You've got these subject associations that play a really critical role. You've got governments who provide funding and who interact with these other organisations and institutions. Research plays an important role.
And in different states and different subjects, the government sometimes are responding to provide funding and resources. But there's some interesting partnerships developing between universities, subject associations, governments, and other organisations to provide professional experience. And you can see some different examples of the professional development that's occurring. It's external, sometimes it's about certification, sometimes they're short courses. And then it's interesting to look at the role that the subject associations are playing in delivery.
And then you've got these really interesting attitudes around subject specialisation and what that means, who's responsible, what determines engagement and support, and then your attitudes to commitment to data for monitoring and measuring the effects of professional learning. These mediating factors determining uptake of PE are interesting to sort of look at the notion of attitudes and learning behaviours of teachers, what agency they have within the system to access, availability of the PE and how accessible it is, particularly if rural, how whether they've got permission from principals to attend, how attainable that learning is. So we saw an example of a teacher who felt that it wasn't really, they weren't ready for it, or it was not at their level. How applicable and appropriate is it for an out-of-field subject? So it's an opportunity position if you start looking at what's available and how can we provide professional education. And then when you start looking at your workplace and what can be done within the workplace, what supportive practices are there, what attitudes underpin that, what's the cultures of support in school, it deals with that tolerance position that principals can show towards principals and schools might have and teachers have towards the practice of assigning teachers to teach out of field. Also in that, of course, right in the middle of that is the teacher. But what we're looking at here is not so much the experience of the teacher, but what's happening in that ecosystem. And so within that, where do we go from here? What might an ideal model look like then? So some factors that we might consider is the nature of the different subjects and how it might look in terms of the role of subject associations in universities. Are subject associations setting a standard of teaching specific certain content and teaching? Are there standards, for example, and could they be leveraged in some way? Do we need a shift from anecdote to evidence and data, which in some contexts there's not much data to really work with? Is it about raising awareness? Is it about cross-sector collaboration and partnerships? Is it about recognising and tending to silences from each of those stakeholder groups? And then also looking for maybe connections between those three different pathways. So where do we go from here? What we're looking for is not one solution. But when you start looking ecologically, it's not about one program funded by the government. It's not about one program run by subject associations. It's looking at what range of things can be available for multiple pathways to becoming in field.